Dan McCauley. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see everyone here. Oh my gosh, amazing, wonderful.
Fabulous.
Yes, everyone can hear us loud and clear. I love this. All right, and I look great. Go on, Jackie Rantanen. Really, go on. Say it again. Okay, super. So let's see. So we have about 150 folks here. We're about 5:02 right now. What do you say we kick off? I know we have about 400 people registered, which is amazing. So thanks to all of you who are here, and I would thank all of you who are not here yet, but maybe other people here can relay that afterwards. Yes, I am blushing. Okay, so let's kick it off, shall we? What do you guys think?
Yes.
Let's do it. All right, wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you all so much for joining us at the inaugural episode of the Happiest Hour. It is an honor, it is a pleasure to welcome you all here. My name is Dan Lerner.
I am Dr. Schlechter.
So together, we have been teaching a course called The Science of Happiness at NYU for almost a decade. We taught about 6,000 students over the past decade. And until last month, it has all been live. We have been in classrooms. We have had such a wonderful opportunity to interact with these amazing students. And of course, as most of you, all of you know, I imagine, and some of you are currently experiencing, either because you are at home from college or you have a kid at home from college with you, we are now teaching teleteaching. And a couple weeks ago, we taught our first telecourse, Alan and myself, and we realized over the course of this hour and a quarter that it was actually an incredible experience. Like, we thought it would be sort of awkward, and the interactions that happened were incredible. Watching people come together and have experiences together, how they responded, and their response to the entire process of, this is so much fun, let's do this, can we please do this more often, really sparked something for us. We thought, why aren't we not doing this for more people? Like, you know, I'm sitting here in my apartment going, how do I help other people? This seemed like a clear way. Alan is actually very much on the front lines as a physician, as a psychiatrist at Bellevue Hospital. He is helping like nobody else other than folks in his position, which is extraordinary. So I just want to say thanks, Alan, for making the time to do this with us as well. So we're going to talk about a lot of things over the course of the next bunch of weeks and maybe well into the future. Some of them are going to be about well-being. And we teach this class called The Science of Happiness. This is called the Happiest Hour, but not all of them. We might talk about positive emotions and things like hope, as we will today. But also, Alan, what else are we going to cover?
We're going to cover the topics just like in class, where we want you to be able to thrive, and we also need you to be able to overcome the challenges. And right now, that's how we find our results, both in the adverse life experiences we're experiencing on a daily basis, but also by increasing our well-being and focusing on wonderful things like hope, as we are going to do today.
Right. So before we get to that hopeful hour that we have ahead, just a few kind of tips and tricks for working with Zoom today. We're still learning it ourselves. We're getting used to it. But here's the day is basically this. We're going to talk to our guest today for about a half an hour. And then we're going to move into a Q&A section for the remaining half an hour. But I want to be really, really clear here. We're keeping the chat on. We're keeping the video on because we would like for you to still weigh in. Think about it this way. If we could, we would be sitting at a very relaxed place, maybe a bar, all together, the three of us having a conversation, everyone else in that room too, raising their hand whenever they had a question, being able to sort of have a lot of give and take. But we also keep it on because you might want to weigh in with some thoughts and some experiences that other folks in the audience are going to want to share too. You're able to privately text with people. So if you see something and you want to get onto that line of conversation, by all means do. We don't want you to have you hanging on our word. By the same token, we're going to ask you some questions throughout, some of your experiences, where you are right now. And so we can get a sense of what your experience is and how we can help, and particularly Dan, in the topic that we're going to be covering can help. So we're gonna mute everyone for right now. But if there are opportunities, if we sort of call on you, please unmute yourself. And in the meantime, ask away. If we don't get to it right now, we will do our best to get to it later in the Q&A, but we really want this to be a dialogue with everyone there. That being said, let me introduce our guest. He is Dr. Daniel Tomasulo. Full disclosure, Dan has been an extraordinary person in my life. He's been like a brother to me since we were in graduate school together. I have learned from him. He's also been a brother to me in that he has beaten me at pretty much everything in the past decade. but we're really fortunate to have him in our lives. He's also been a frequent guest in our class, so Alan knows him really, really well. And Dan's fascinating for a number of reasons. He doesn't have one career, he has had many careers. Beginning years ago as a stand-up comedian, we talk about hope. But since then, an MFA in writing, his master's in applied positive psychology, a PhD in psychology, and he uses them all. Dan is on faculty at Teachers College here at Columbia University. He is on the teaching staff at University of Pennsylvania for the master's in applied positive psychology program, but he also authors a daily column, the Ask the Therapist column for Psych Central. And as an author, he wrote an award-winning memoir, The American Snake Pit, which was released 2018, harrowing stuff. But that's one of the things that I think makes him so perfect for being our very first guest. Which is that his experience runs the gamut from harrowing experiences at Willowbrook facility to being named one of the top 10 experts on depression, but also someone who's an expert in positive psychology. In fact, he has a book, Learned Hopefulness, which will be published in about a month. So we get to talk to him today about just that thing, hope. So welcome, Dan. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for making the time.
It is such a treat to be here. And just to applaud what the two of you have been doing and the organization that is supporting you and all this work to bring it right out into the community. And I'm just really, really thrilled to have an opportunity to talk to the group and maybe share some of the stuff I've learned about hope in the last couple of years.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you. Now, look, people have come here for a variety of reasons. I know people have come here knowing there's a series going on. And you may have come here because you are dealing with the challenges that, well, all of us are dealing with these days in various capacities, whether we're here in New York or somewhere out there else in the States or beyond. And so it may be about kind of just trying to make the most of a difficult situation. It also may be trying to address those real challenges. And there's a good chance that they're both. But there's one thing that we all have in common, and that is we understand the concept of hope. So before we kick off with Dan, we talked to Dan about this before, but wondering, kind of, as you experience hope right now, just on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you sit? If you are completely without hope, if you don't see a place for hope or a role for hope, go ahead and put 1 down there. If you are feeling full of hope in the text box, go ahead and put a 10. Anywhere else you want to put, go ahead. And we'll just get a sense of sort of where people are. Great. 7, 5, 6. All right. 9s, 8s, 4s, 3s. So we have some high numbers there. We have some low numbers there. We have a lot sitting right there in the middle. We have a 10 there. All right. We have, we have some really interestingly high numbers.
Yeah.
And then we have some numbers that I think a lot of people might anticipate. Theodore's mom says 5 or 6. Theodore's mom. But we have some lower numbers, which is what one might anticipate. So, Dan, given this, what makes hope such a unique emotion? Why do we see such an array, especially at a time like this?
Yeah, I think it's really kind of interesting. I'm just watching the numbers scroll in. A couple of things about hope that make it fascinating and unique in terms of something to study and how to apply it. It's the only one of the positive emotions that requires negativity or uncertainty to be activated. So if we take a look at anything else, things like gratitude or bliss or awe, they don't need a jump start. But hope is really unique because it needs something that's not okay in order for it to get activated. And I think that's probably the reason why we're talking about it so much now, is that the activation is here. Our lives have been upended in ways that are not predictable. And every day we have to shift to the challenge. So the uncertainty is there almost daily now. And whatever kind of uncertainty we had in the past, it's now front and center. So that part is present. And then negativity, because there's losses, there's changes, there's things coming down. So the uncertainty and negativity are certainly here, which means almost by definition that hope has been activated. And the question now is, what do we do with that potential activation? And how do we maintain it?
Right. So, it's interesting, when we were sending out these invitations, we got some wonderful responses. And we got a couple that basically indicated that this isn't the time, right? I mean, there's no place for hope, basically. Why would we be talking about these things? I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit. why are we talking about hope, right? And
Yeah.
what can we do in that way? Why is it appropriate?
You know what's so interesting? One of the things that fascinated me about hope was it had this unique place in positive psychology. And at the very same time, when I started to look at the research, you look at the medical research, the educational research, the character strength research, and then you look at the social psych research, you put it all together, and it's like the parable of the three blind men holding the elephant. The one who holds on to the tail says, well, this thing must look like a rope. The one that holds on to the trunk says it must look like a tree. Another one that holds on to the ear says, oh, it must look like a bird. They all have a piece of it, but it didn't seem like there was a unifying theory. So part of what happened was I said, what if they're all right? Instead of trying to pick one theory, what would happen if we looked at all this stuff on hope? What would it look like if everybody had a piece of the puzzle? What would the puzzle look like? And that became like really intriguing, because we use hope sort of interchangeably with the idea of faith right now. You know, I hope something will happen. But the truth is, hope has to do with our expectation of control in the future. Faith is when we've surrendered that to something else. So there's a difference between what scientists look at for hope and what can be applied, and what we might commonly use it of as faith. So a lot of the stuff that really interested me was, okay, if hope is about our expectation of control in the future, how do we maximize that? How do we get that to happen? And if uncertainty is the activator for that, if negativity is the activator for that, what is it that we have to do in order to start getting a handle on what it is we can do in the future?
And the way you've created that relationship.
I'm sorry.
And another term that people, I'm breaking up.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm breaking.
You are breaking up. So, you know, I think if I may interject, and I'm wrong here. I'm wondering, are you thinking about the idea of sort of realistic hope? Is that what you're going for, Alan? Oh, we've lost Alan. There it is. So, yes, Alan is choppy for everybody else. So, so how do we come to that idea then of realistic hope? You know, there's this concept or a study in positive psychology of realistic optimism, right? Optimism can be really healthy. Too much optimism is not so healthy. We need a healthy both dose of pessimism. How is hope different from optimism, and how do we sort of navigate that given any time, but really where we are right now?
Sure. So just a couple of things, right? So optimism has to do with a temperament, an attitude towards something. So if I were to kind of collapse all the stuff about it, optimists make really big when something is good and really small when something is bad, right? And pessimists do just the opposite. They make really big when something is bad, and when something is good, they minimize it. There's a few other nuances in there, but basically when we're talking about optimism, we're talking about an attitude. I think things are going to get better is an optimistic attitude. But if I want to transfer that and really say something about hope, it's that I'm going to make things better. There's an element of control that comes into it when we talk about hope that's not part of optimism. So if I say, you know what I'm going to do tomorrow? I'm going to make food for the whole week. I'm going to do that so we don't have to worry about going to the store, and I'm going to buy all the food, get everything together. Now that means I've got a plan. I've got some control that I'm going to put that into operation. I've got goals. I've got all the components that make hope hope. Whereas an optimistic person might say, it'll all work out. We'll have plenty of food for tomorrow, but not really have the action elements that are connected to it. So faith and optimism are really, you know, in the same category, but hope is very unique because it means we've got something that we have to do in order to get a little bit of control in the future or influence the future.
Got it.
Dan, I'm a child psychiatrist, and so I'm always thinking about development. And
Right.
I'm curious, how do you think we develop hope, and how do you think we can help people develop hope?
Well, I think that's a great question, Alan, because one of the things that came from the research of doing the book for Learned Hopefulness had to do with decisions that are made. And basically, there are high hope people, right, and low hope people. And as you start to look at these decisions, you find out that the high hope people are making decisions that really start to focus on things like control, looking for the good, looking for possibilities. In other words, the people who are making better decisions that will activate hope are systematically looking at negativity or uncertainty. And instead of seeing it as an obstacle, they see it as a challenge or an opportunity. So in that initial moment of being hit with something that's not okay, the very first thing that high hope people do is they start making decisions about what they can do. They focus on strengths rather than weaknesses. They focus on people rather than isolation. They make decisions that constantly nudge them toward the more positive side. Whereas the folks low on hope tend to go into a negative cycle. They have a fixed mindset rather than growth. Mm-hmm. They tend to isolate rather than connect with others. They tend to focus on weaknesses rather than strengths. So what you start to see is an upward spiral, the kind of things maybe Barbara Fredrickson would have talked about with, broaden and build, and then a downward spiral where these patterns of thought and rumination happen.
Can you say a bit more about that, Dan? Because some folks here are familiar with those spirals and Barb's work, but you say a bit what that might look like in people's lives.
Sure. So let me just kind of walk you through a couple of the things that have happened, right? If I wake up in the morning and I'm in a grumpy mood, not that I'm ever in a grumpy mood.
I've seen you wake up in the morning.
That's true.
I've never seen you.
No, I've been in a grumpy.
I can vouch for that. I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning when sharing a hotel room with you to find you merrily typing away. I'm in a grumpy mood.
That's true.
I'm not in a grumpy mood.
But so if I wake up in a grumpy mood, and if I get up and I let that mood dominate, if I believe there's nothing I can do about that, I've started with a sense that my thoughts are fixed. My capacity for changing them is fixed. And the decision I would make at that point is that I'm powerless over those thoughts. If that's a decision I have, then when I get out of bed, I'm already in a weakened state, right? And now what happens is anything that I do will be piling on to that sense of being stuck. But if I wake up and I'm in a crummy mood and I say, wait a minute, let me review the 3 gratitudes I have for yesterday. 3 very specific things that happened yesterday that really filled me up. Mm. What happens is I've already done the number one thing in positive psychology you can do. I've self-regulated. Mm. I've said I don't have to tolerate this negative mood. I can challenge myself and specifically look for a couple of good things. I'm not ignoring the crummy mood. I'm just saying it doesn't have to dominate. So by going after the 3 gratitudes that I have, I've initiated a slight positivity, which means I've also initiated this sense that I have some control over my future. So these things start to work hand in hand. And what Barbara Fredrickson has identified is that positive emotions are like nutrients. So that if I wake up in the morning thirsty and I take a little bit of liquid, I'm fortified enough now to get up and go do the next thing. So a lot of the work for me happens in that reverie, in the moment, when I wake up in the morning. And on the occasion when I wake up in a good mood, it's how do you facilitate that and add to it? Because that starts the upward spiral. You know, one of the opening phrases in Learn Hopefulness is, hope is never further away than your next thought. And I really genuinely believe that it's not the one-off thought about something being negative or crummy that's going to hurt us. It's the rumination. It's this idea that I repeat that thought. You know, would you guys be open to a little bit of an experiment?
Sure.
Okay. So I don't know how many people we have, but let's all try this together, just so you can get the flavor of hope and what I'm talking about. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, and I'd like you to imagine that there's a lemon on a table in front of you, and I'd like you to smell just the slightest wisp of lemon in the air as you see this lemon. Then I'd like you to cut that lemon in half and see the juice from the lemon spill out of it little by little, and the scent of the lemon become a little stronger. Now, if you would, pick up half of that lemon and put it right under your nose and try to smell it. And you'll notice that it has gotten just a little bit stronger because it's so close. If you would stick your tongue out now and rub that lemon, the open part of it, down your tongue, and then bite right into it. Now, as you open your eyes and come on back, most of you will have produced saliva, right? You produce saliva and there ain't no lemon. So you have to think about this. When we have a negative thought and we repeat it over and over again, look at what we could do with our imagination and the biochemistry that produced saliva when nothing was there. What happens when we ruminate with negative thoughts over and over again? Think of what it's doing to our body, the cortisol that's pumping through it, the adrenaline. We're creating a biochemical nightmare through our imagination and our thoughts. Well, we have the capacity to turn that around. That is the most exciting thing to me about hope, is that we make decisions of either following that downward spiral or not. A decision not to change is a decision to remain the same. So if I'm going in a downward spiral, if I wake up in that crummy mood and I decide not to change it, that's a decision to continue. And that to me is like, okay, all the power is right there. It's what direction are we going to change those thoughts? You still got lemon in your mouth.
I'm really curious, how many folks here could smell, taste? How many people have the experience of salivating? Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at that. I love that.
Good. So that just gives us a little taste, no pun intended. All right, some pun.
Fine. I'm not gonna. Don't go sour on it,
you know, but that's just our thoughts. You know, and we if I give you let me do one more experiment since we're having so much fun here, right?
You're having fun. Andrew Gasper's making a cocktail with that lemon. He's having fun.
So close your eyes again. Let's do one more. And this time what I'd like you to do is think about somebody you love and who loves you. And picture them as clearly in your mind's eye. And feel where their love gets anchored in your body. And as you get ready, just very slowly come on back to the group. And most people will talk about a warmth in their chest because the vagus nerve has been activated. You know, there's a sense of vagal tone, there's a shift. The reason why we hug front to front, not side to side, is because the vagus nerve is here. We're trying to connect our heart and our mind. So inside of a couple of minutes, we went from lemons to lovers because of the way we thought about it. That's what we're up against moment to moment.
So, not to go too far into relationships, but this idea of, most people here, if not everyone here, is sitting alone. Maybe a few people around them, and those people they may not necessarily want to be hanging out with right now. It's been a while, So what can we do? I mean, and it's interesting because, Dan has run this really wonderful intervention. I don't know if it's the appropriate description, called the virtual gratitude visit in our classroom. When one has a gratitude visit with someone to whom they want to show gratitude, even though that person is not there, but rather there's an empty chair, and they speak to them, and they then switch roles and speak back to the other. So given the situation we're in, where so many of us are either solo or been with the same people for too long, not getting out very much, what do we do right now? How can we employ this in a beneficial and realistic way?
Oh, Dan, I think that's such a great question. It's so funny. I've published a lot on the virtual gratitude visit, from having worked with it for such a long time. And, every time I've written about it, different editors had different responses. And in the last piece that I wrote was a chapter for a book. And one of the editors said, well, virtual could get kind of confusing because, we talk to people sometimes on this thing called Zoom, or sometimes this other thing. And could you really do like virtual gratitude? So I wrote him back a description. And just the other day he wrote me and he says, I'm glad you called it virtual gratitude, So let me talk a little bit about how it works. I think that there's a few layers of this now that are really important. The first is that this is the time for you to reach out to people who have been friends, mentors, teachers, people at work who have helped you. And it doesn't have to be a big thing, but just an acknowledgement for how much they've helped you in your life becomes an incredibly powerful thing, not only for you to craft something that you write or send, but it becomes something that's a genuine gift to receive. So just because we're in bubbles doesn't mean that we can't reach out. The second thing I would say is that do the video connections, do the Zoom connections with people. And one of the things that I've taken to do with my friends is to make sure when we connect, we take a moment before we do whatever we're going to do to honor the relationship. To make sure, say, man, I am really glad to see you and to be your friend and to be connected. Because at the end of the day, acknowledging that fills everybody up. And if people are not available, then there's a couple of ways that you can manage this that have true validity.
I'm sorry, when you say not available, you just...
Sure. First of all, they might not have technology. They might be in a type of quarantine where they can't have access to it. I unfortunately know some people in quarantine that can't get access to things. They may have passed on. People who may have been in your life at one point that were very helpful that have passed on. Or you may have lost them. They could have moved away a year ago and through no form of negligence, you've just lost track with them. But in some way, if people aren't available, that doesn't mean you can't still activate a true gratitude for them. And a few ways to do that. One would be to write a letter, either type it out or handwritten, and not one that you're going to send, of course, if you don't know where to send it to, but one that allows you to have the full expression of your gratitude towards somebody. And then it depends on your level of creativity. One of the things that we've done is we've videotaped some of these. And then people watch the videotape back and they answer as if they were the person receiving it. It might sound a little corny, but the truth of the matter is when you can play the role of the other, you get such a full experience of both sending and receiving. And this is stuff that you can do in the privacy of your own home or wherever it is that you are. So the writing the expression, the videotaping it, and somehow letting people know and acknowledging it in yourself becomes important. So whatever level you choose to do that.
So, a number of folks have asked a question, which is clearly very, very pertinent right now, which is when, and you pointed out when they're unavailable, they're in quarantine in a certain way, where they're unable to be connected via technology. And as someone mentioned, it's just happening and becoming more common, we're losing people. Yeah. People are passing. And, I just want to note, when Dan has come to our class in the past, we've had such remarkable experiences when he's brought a student to the front to walk through a virtual gratitude visit. And of course, you choose who it is you're going to show gratitude to. And a number of students have chosen grandparents, uncles, aunts, people who were important to them who have passed. So would you describe this the same way if you're talking about people who are grieving right now, as opposed to gratitude for someone who was in their past?
Yes.
Yeah.
So let me just say, first and foremost, this isn't something that you want to just broadly do. It's really something that you want to do if it feels like there is an important thing that you want to express that you perhaps didn't get a chance to express. And what I mean by that is that this is about you being more whole and more integrated. So it's not just an exercise. It's something that is done to help you move through some of the pain. One of the things about positive psychology that I think is inaccurate is that we ignore the negative emotions. Well, the truth is, when we're talking about gratitude, we often are talking about something called a catharsis of integration, meaning that by accessing a really positive emotion, we can sometimes touch a lot of other negative emotions in that process. You can remember we did this in a class, Alan and Dan have 500 people in the class, and someone was supposed to come watch me do a thing and they were late. And by the time they got there, I was in the middle of doing this virtual gratitude visit. We have 500 students crying. And the person came in and said, "Oh my goodness, I thought this was positive psychology." Well, yeah, it is. It's just, So let me just say that, part of hope and part of gratitude is about integrating emotions. So that if you were to do this, remember that coming in touch with the gratitude may also bring up some other feelings, and that would be perfectly normal. And again, after doing thousands of these, it's very common for people to be a little surprised by the fact that when they feel this good thing about somebody who's been in their life, they also feel this other stuff. So if that does happen, if you go to do that, that's very understandable. And it's very simple. You put a chair across the way, and you would imagine the person sitting in that chair. And you take a minute before you begin to just kind of soak that in, to be in their presence. We just did a loving kindness meditation before. And you could feel that. That's what we're after. That person may not be available, but their love still is. You carry that with you. And activating that is important. And then not to have anything scripted, but to just say something back that allows you to honor, connect, show your respect, your appreciation, your gratitude. And in doing that, you can then reverse roles, become the other person, and to, once again, take a moment to really get into the other role. In psychodrama, we would call this a role reversal, because now you get to be the other person and you get to receive this delicious gratitude that's just been delivered. And it's so amazing to me. The reason why I love this work, you can move 3 feet away and there's another whole person that person's become. It's like magic, which I just love. So when you're over there, you get to receive it, you get to appreciate it, and then you come on back to your chair. That's the only rule. You have to start in your chair and end in your chair. And at the end, you just take a moment to say thank you. I quite honestly, I do lots of these. It's a couple of times a week, either with gratitudes or self-compassion, because self-compassion works the same way. You do a role reversal with that part of you that you want to have more compassion for. And what happens is over time, you become you become excited about doing it because it's always a little bit of a surprise. They call it embodied cognition. It basically means that by playing another role, your brain changes. So I'm different sitting here than I would be if I was sitting in that chair or that chair. And if I'm playing another role from those chairs, I get the benefit of having parts of my brain activated and think in ways that I might not be able to think if I'm just doing all in my head here. So the literal role reversal has something to that.
Yes, you know, a couple of people have mentioned earlier in the chat that when they were in school for theater, that they were taught that the way that our brain works is it doesn't always distinguish so clearly between daydreaming, for example, and what's actually happening.
Absolutely.
What we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it actually comes from game theory. You know, this idea that when you're playing an avatar or playing a different role, your brain is working differently because you're in this different role. This is just, you know, psychodrama is the therapeutic version of it. Very, very powerful stuff. And a very simple role play. And what happens, by the way, they tend to go very quick. It's very rare that it'd be more than 5 minutes. It's usually 2 or 3 minutes because, you know, you're choosing somebody that you really care about. You're kind of in that new space of receiving it and then coming back to being you. So it's kind of a cool thing to do.
Yeah. Dan, I get more hope. And, oh, I just lost my mic.
It's in and out. It's in and out.
The more you speak, the more hopeful I become. And I think it's a very contagious emotion. The reverse is also true. I think a lot of people struggle with how to read the newspaper or watch news.
Yes.
And maintain the hope. Could you talk about how to balance these things?
Yeah, sure. I think it would be important to have really strict limits on news intake. I'm not recommending a news fast, you know, like fasting completely, cutting it off completely. I don't think that would be wise. But, you know, if you limit yourself to 15 minutes a day, and it could be 3 5-minute periods, a 5-minute and 10 minute, because the truth of the matter is the negative thinking can be perpetrated by outside forces. And I'm not saying anything negative about any particular anything, but if I sit down and I watch a horror movie for 2 hours and I don't realize I have the power to change the channel, I'm going to be horrified. So just remember that the control is yours. And not avoiding it, but don't immerse yourself in it because it'll start that downward spiral. So the first thing is that. The second thing is I would plan micro goals for yourself during the day. And what I mean by micro goals is to be very, very, very specific. I just wrote an article called Chopping Carrots for Dinner. because there's some really new research. It just literally came out on Friday. It just blew my mind. These guys are talking about 3 types of coping, right? The first type is called regressive coping, which is basically pure avoidance, right? So if I know I've got to deal with something, right, and I don't deal with it, and I avoid it, it gets me off the hook in the short run. But one of 4 negative emotions are going to happen. I'm going to get depressed, angry, guilty, or resentful, or some combination of those, right? So if that happens, my self-esteem goes down because I never dealt with what I should have dealt with, which means the next time the crisis comes along, I'm not going to be in good enough shape to deal with it, so I'm likely to avoid it again. And as you can imagine, that's what creates that downward spiral. But if I have a transformational coping style, or I have a proactive coping style, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, this is the news. Here's 5 minutes of the news. It's not good, right? Okay, what can I do about it? I might not be able to do anything about what's on the news, but I can go prepare dinner. I can chop the carrots and prepare a meal. Now that might sound kind of crazy, but here's the research behind it. Proactive coping has to do with being mindful of the moment as well as planning for the future. So where does that happen? Well, if you've ever watched, I'm a horrible cook, by the way. Let's just get that on the table. I'm a horrible cook. So this metaphor is not for me because I don't prepare anything. I get something frozen. I put it in the thing that unfreezes it. That's my cooking. Right?
Which is why the title of your article is chopped carrots as opposed to baked lasagna.
Yes, yes.
Even you.
Yeah, that's right. Even I can chop carrots. Right?
I've seen it.
That's right. Exactly. But so that what they found is that it's the people who have the capacity to be both mindful and plan ahead that do the best. If you only plan ahead and aren't mindful, that's not a good situation. If you're only mindful, not planning ahead, you're not getting the best bang for the buck. So where does that happen naturally? If you think about how a good cook would prepare something, they're in the moment preparing it, but they're thinking about the 30 other things that they can do in order to get that soup ready or get the dinner ready. And all of that is now in the moment and planning ahead. So what I would do, Alan, to come all the way back to your question, first and foremost, limit the negativity. The rumination of thought or the input of negativity from any source. The second thing I would do is really make sure I have a series of micro goals during the day so that I am breaking my day up and I can get little successes. You know, if I've conceptualized negative thinking and positive thinking as negative thoughts are like pebbles and positive thoughts are like feathers. Can the feathers outweigh the pebbles? Yeah, but you need a lot of them. No one great big feather is going to do it. So a lot of little feathers means let me have a bunch of micro goals so I can feel good about accomplishment. I can clean the closet. I can clean the drawer, which, by the way, my drawer over here really needs to be clean. That's my goal for tomorrow. But anyway, that's that idea is where this all goes.
So just out of curiosity, off the top of your head, do you recall where people can find the research? A couple of folks have asked.
Which research are we talking about now?
About the different types of so transformational.
Oh, sure. So literally, it's called chopping carrots for dinner. The Science of Hope in a Time of Crisis. Just plug in my name. It's already been published. And the link to the original article is in that article. Everything is there. What's beautiful.
The text box, by the way, if people want to check it out.
Yeah. Okay. What's really beautiful about that is that this is this is new stuff. And for those of you who are students, the lead author is an undergraduate student, which just warmed my heart. Last week I reviewed stuff out of Harvard from the Flourishing team, and it was all these great researchers. And this week it's an undergraduate student who has the lead article. And I'm just thrilled that people are kind of pushing the envelope about the best ways to use this stuff.
Well, it's just, what I'd love to do is open up for questions. I was going to say, one of the themes that we have, clearly Alan and I have our eyes very focused on this, are college students. I mean, students, I should say, really, I'd almost go, all students, sort of K through college. We have our eyes on college students. I have a 12-year-old here who's, bouncing off the walls, but he does that usually anyway. And then, I talked to friends just the other day whose son is a senior in high school and he's missing these wonderful opportunities. And that's challenging. And then another friend this morning whose daughter is a first-year student in college. And so we're sort of looking at these folks who are really going through transitional periods and being thrown into this, sort of thrown up in the air. What are ways that they can sort of get a grasp on hope, right? What can they do right now? And because of the micro goals, how do they reframe in a way so they can make it manageable?
Yeah. You know what would be helpful? Can I do another? Do I have time for a quick demonstration?
Yeah, of course. Let's do that, and then we'll take some questions from folks.
Yeah, because I think your question is really good, but I think the best way for me to answer it, I'm going to shift to my share screen. And I'm going to show an image, if all this works. Let's see. Pardon me for the thing with that. Okay, so that's going to go there. That goes there. This goes here. Thank you.
I
Okay, so let me do this. I am going to show this. Okay, so I want to talk about our capacity for shifting perception. And I know a couple of folks probably on the call have seen this already, but I'd like to just have you take a look at this mountain and reflection of the mountain in the lake. If you could, I don't know if my cursor shows up on it, but if you see the edge of the mountain on top, just follow your eye on the edge of the mountain on top and try to determine if the reflection in the lake below is an accurate reflection of that mountain range. Now, as you're doing that, I'm going to encourage you to put your left ear on your left shoulder and look at that image again.
Oh, yeah, if you could all open up all your video screens so you can see each other, that's always a nice thing here.
Exactly. And what you'll notice if you put your left ear on your left shoulder, that to the far left is the head of an adult, lips, eyes, and they're in a prayer pose. And there's a child's head below them, also in a prayer pose with shoulders. Just a quick thumbs up, yeah, so we can see. Did everybody see that? Okay. Yeah, I did see people are looking the other way going, damn, we don't see a darn thing. No, okay. Now, my point about that is that we did not change the image, but you saw something different. You went from seeing something barren and kind of stark to seeing something kind of beautiful, kind of cool. And all that it took was a shift in perception. Now, what I'm going to do with that is I'd like you to keep watching this, and I'm going to take you through a couple of other things. Oh, yes, I'm in the Positive Psychologists Union, so I'm required to show this during every presentation. No, I'm not. If I ask the question that goes with this, I've already done you a disservice because you think there's only two possible answers when the answer to this is the glass is completely full, half with water, half with air. And ultimately, what we're trying with positive psychology is this: to be able to see things one way and then see them another. So if you look at this image, you'll be able to see the profile and then the straight on approach. Now, I've set you up for this, so let's see if it works. Now what I'd like you to do is look at this next image and watch what happens when you look at it. This is a completely different image, but notice that you've started to explore it in a different way. And if you do, you'll notice, oh yeah, there's something beautiful here too. Oh yes. If I hadn't shown you the first one and walked you through it, the chances are really good you wouldn't have seen that. So my point with all of that, and thank you for tolerating all those examples. My point with all of that is, whatever the situation is, our first challenge is to ask yourself a question, right? How else can I look at this? Or even better, to give yourself a statement. There's another way of looking at this. And then the challenge becomes, all right, well, what is that other way? So the very first thing to do is to take an assessment. If it's like, okay, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, then you start making an assessment of what is it I can do. If you focus on what you've lost and what you can't do, that's going to be a downward spiral, guaranteed. But if you focus on what is it that you can do in this moment that gives you the slightest bit of influence or control in the future, that will shift. And the last thing that I'll say about that, you know, what happens in the family, is to make sure you have enough alone time. Now that might sound crazy, but what I'm saying is, if you're at home and you're with people and it's dysregulating to us when all these things are off, make sure you have time to yourself. And that could be reading a book, taking a walk, a bike ride, meditating. If you don't have a meditation practice, now's the time. And if you do, now's the time to increase it. So self-contemplation during this time gives you a little room for thought, which can be extremely helpful.
Dan, people have asked, how do I help others develop hopefulness right now?
Wow, that's such a great question. First, I would say.
By the way, let me just note, that wasn't Alan's question.
Wow.
I have great questions down, though. So some people are saying, by the way, can't hear Alan. Alan was saying that some people asked, how do I help others develop hope, especially in a time like this?
And a terrific question. And I'm gonna say something that might sound like an odd place to start, but I'm an odd guy, so why not? Hey, so the thing that you want to do is make sure that you have self-compassion, because you're not going to be able to help anybody if you're feeling deficient. So the first thing is to make sure that you're finding ways to get filled up enough. And that means making sure that you're taking really good physical care of yourself, good emotional care of yourself. You got to treat yourself like you are your best friend, and make sure that you're in a good place as often and as much as you can be. Because if you can start there, then it becomes an easy thing, because then you're operating from a state of abundance. You can give if you feel you've got something to give. If I'm feeling depleted, it becomes more difficult for me to give. But if I'm feeling filled up and I'm feeling good and okay, and then it's all right. In the same spirit, I would say that a way that you can fill yourself up is just through an act of kindness. It could be as simple, it doesn't have to be a whole gratitude visit, but it could be a note, I'm thinking of you. I'm missing you. Any act of kindness has this beautiful bank shot, right? If I do an act of kindness, I get filled up. The person I do it for gets filled up. But through a process known as elevation, anybody witnessing it will get filled up. So the idea here is that we can get a pretty big bang for the buck in terms of just being kind to others, just having gratitude, because what that does is gratitude and kindness actually activate the need for the next person to be kind. You know, when you see somebody doing something kind, it's like, I get a little aggravated because I think, why didn't I think of that?
You know, just to note, you know, Sebastian before said, he had a great metaphor. He said, it's like oxygen masks on airplanes. Not that we're flying right now, but you know, you take care of yourself, and then you're able to take care of others.
Absolutely.
You know, Alan always refers to this as the most pro-social emotion we have, and it's for this reason. It's you know, it's not just, as you point out, Dan. You know, and Sebastian said it's me and then it's somebody else, but then also to be able to give, and you see it and you think, that's wonderful. Am I not inspired to do the same? You know, there's a wonderful intervention. It's called Conscious Acts of Kindness, where once a week, and this is a little bigger than what Dan's suggesting, once a week, this is Sonia Lubomirski's research, I believe, in the UC schools, we do 5 conscious acts of kindness. Simple, something that we've thought about. I'm gonna cook dinner for someone tonight, or I'm gonna buy the next person in line coffee at Starbucks, although that's pricier than it used to be. Or I'm just gonna make sure that I do a kindness for someone, like giving them a note, sending them a text saying how grateful I am for them. And when you do that once a day, once a week, 5 times in that one day, not 5 times a week overall, but the intensity of 5 times in one day, our overall levels of well-being go up in addition to a number of other factors. So there are various ways to work with this, right? That can give us a kind of a micro moment and all the way to a much bigger hit. But we can start investing small, and that still is quite wonderful. Okay, so I know we're coming towards the end here, and we've had such great questions. I hope that we've addressed some of them. Thank you, Dan.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Speaking of friendship, you know, just being asked by you guys and having a chance to hang out with you, it's lovely, and I love what you're doing, and I hope people got something from it.
So much love to everyone on the call.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for everything. By the way, next Wednesday, we're going to have another good friend of ours, Corey Mascara.
Oh, you got to see him.
I know, right? How do you miss Corey Mascara? He has a book that just came out called Stop Missing Your Life, and he'll be talking to us about mindfulness, meditation. You may have heard him on various meditation apps, but he's a brilliant, young, wonderful, intriguing, engaging fella who also happens to be a terrific friend of ours. So
I'm glad you had me go first, so I hate following him, man.
That's why we did it. Everyone hates following him.
Everyone.
Yes, love to everybody.
Love, enjoy your Seders tonight if you're going.
Yes, for holiday weekend. Be safe, be healthy, and we look forward to seeing you again. If we can do anything, please reach out, email us at dan@happiesthour.org. That'll get to both of us. We're happy to answer questions, happy to help. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.